The Arizona desert had a way of stripping a person down to their last ounce of strength, leaving only the truth of who they were. Clara Whitmore had learned that quickly, far more quickly than she ever wished to. The sun hung overhead like a burning brand, its heat cascading in waves that blurred the horizon and made every shadow quiver. The desert floor shimmered, the earth cracked and pale, as if even the land itself were too exhausted to hold together. Clara stumbled forward, her breath rattling like loose gravel in her chest. Every step felt wrong, every heartbeat louder than the last. Her dress, once crisp and proper, was torn in jagged strips where it had caught on brush as she fled. Blood soaked through the fabric at her side, the deep red already turning brown beneath the sun's relentless glare. She pressed a trembling hand against the wound, but all she felt was warmth and the slow, frightening pulse of pain. Hours had passed since the stagecoach had been ambushed, though time had stretched into something shapeless and cruel. She remembered the sudden gunfire, the shouts, the horses screaming as they reared. The bandits hadn't expected resistance, and when Clara had fought back swinging a broken piece of wood with more desperation than skill, one of the men struck her down. When she woke, the stagecoach was gone. So were the passengers. And she was alone. At first, Clara had shouted for help, her voice cracking the silence of the desert like a whip. But the land swallowed her cries, answering only with a dry wind that carried dust across her lips. Soon, she had stopped shouting. Soon after, she had stopped hoping someone would hear. Her vision wavered. The sky flashed white, then blue, then white again. She fell to her knees, the hard earth biting into her legs. In front of her stood a low mesquite tree, its branches twisted and sharp-looking, like a skeletal hand crooked in warning. It cast a thin sliver of shade barely enough to cool a child, much less a grown woman, but she crawled toward it anyway. Her fingers dug into the dirt. Her breath hitched. She collapsed beneath the tree, her cheek pressing against the dusty roots. The little patch of shadow gave her no relief, but it felt like the closest thing to safety she had left. "Please," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was speaking to. God, maybe. Or fate. Or no one at all. Her voice was so dry it barely sounded human. The desert stretched out before her, empty and shimmering. No sign of riders. No birds circling above. No tracks on the sand except her own uneven trail of footsteps and drops of blood. She closed her eyes. Her heart slowed. A strange peace came with the thought that maybe the desert, this endless wasteland of heat and silence, would lull her to sleep and she wouldn't have to feel the pain anymore. But then the ground seemed to tremble beneath her. Faintly at first, like a heartbeat not her own. She wasn't sure if it was real or simply her mind turning strange at the edge of death. But the trembling grew, soft at first, then steady, hoofbeats. Her eyes cracked open, just enough to see a shape appear through the buzzing haze of heat, a silhouette rising from the horizon, steady and tall, moving with purpose. A man on horseback, dark braids over broad shoulders, a spear strapped to the saddle. The figure paused atop a ridge, scanning the land with a trained, sharp gaze. Clara tried to speak, but nothing came out, not even a sound. The rider nudged his horse forward, descending the slope with sure steps. As he grew closer, she noticed the detail she could never mistake: the painted leather, the eagle feather woven into his hair, the calm expression shaped by years of watching the land. An Apache scout. He dismounted in silence, kneeling beside her with movements measured and gentle. His shadow fell over her, cool compared to the sun that had been torturing her for hours. Clara blinked, unable to believe he was real. "You should not sleep," he said softly. His voice carried a calm certainty that made her throat ache with tears she couldn't cry. "Not here. Not now." Her lips parted. She tried to speak, to ask for help, to warn him she was dying. But he was already reaching for a water skin, already lifting her slightly as if she weighed nothing. His hands were steady, so steady she felt her fear ease without meaning to. "Don't move," he instructed, tightening the cloth around her wound with careful skill. "I'll help you." In that moment, bleeding, weak, and barely conscious, Clara understood one thing clearly. This man wasn't going to leave her in the wasteland. Not today. Not ever. The cave was small, barely large enough to hold both Clara and the horse. Yet it felt like the first place she had seen that could be called safe in hours. The red rock walls absorbed the sunlight that had been stabbing her eyes all day, casting a muted, almost protective glow over the space. She sank to the floor, leaning against a smooth stone, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion. Her muscles ached as if the desert itself had branded her, and every heartbeat sent jolts of pain from the side she had injured during the stagecoach attack. Koa, her rescuer, moved quietly, almost reverently, around her. He unpacked a small bundle of herbs from his saddlebag, arranging them in neat piles. Clara watched him with a mix of awe and disbelief. She had been raised in town, where doctors wore white coats and medicine came in bottles, not hand-picked leaves and roots. Yet there was a confidence in Koa's movements, a certainty that spoke of generations of knowledge and survival. She realized that this man, whose very presence had seemed so threatening at first, held a mastery over life and death she had never encountered. "Water," he said simply, holding a skin to her lips. The cool liquid slipped down her throat, washing away some of the grit and dust that had settled there. Her hands shook as she drank, the effort nearly too much for her weakened body. Koa kept a hand on her back, steadying her with quiet strength. There was no rush, no panic, only focus. He began to clean the wound on her side, gently removing the dried blood and dirt. Then applying the herbs and wrapping it with a strip of cloth torn from his own saddle blanket. Clara felt a shiver run through her. The pain was still there, but it was different now, less unbearable. There was care in every motion, a deliberate gentleness that she hadn't expected from a stranger. Her mind, foggy from pain and sun, began to notice details: the calluses on his hands, the rhythm of his breathing, the faint scent of sage smoke clinging to his clothes. These were not the hands of a bandit or a stranger who might leave her to die. These were the hands of someone who understood the fragility of life in the desert. She tried to speak, but the words came out as a whisper. "Why? Why are you helping me?" Koa paused and looked at her, his eyes calm, unwavering. "Because no life should be left to die alone," he said. His voice was soft, yet it carried the weight of a promise. "Not yours." The simplicity of his answer stunned her. She had expected suspicion or perhaps a warning. Instead, he offered something she had not felt in days or perhaps ever: safety. As night fell, the temperature dropped quickly. The desert had no patience for those who lingered after sunset. Clara shivered, and Koa draped his own blanket around her shoulders. He had lit a small fire outside the cave, keeping it low but warm. The flames cast dancing shadows against the walls, and she realized she could see him clearly for the first time. He was not the fierce, untouchable warrior she had imagined. There was a gentleness to his posture, a quiet respect in the way he moved. "You should rest," he said. "Your body needs strength to heal." She wanted to argue, to insist she could move on her own, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she watched him, feeling an unfamiliar sense of trust begin to root itself in her chest. For the first time since the attack, she allowed herself to relax. Her eyelids drooped, and she felt the tension in her shoulders dissolve slightly. Koa continued his work, preparing a small meal of dried meat and bread he had carried. He ate sparsely, mostly observing her, ensuring she consumed enough to regain some energy. Clara realized he did not ask for thanks. He did not expect it. His care was its own reward. Later, as the moon rose over the jagged desert horizon, Clara lay on the cool stone, finally able to close her eyes without fear. The stars above were bright and vast, and the desert, which had seemed so merciless during the day, now felt like a quiet companion. She listened to the soft sounds of Koa moving outside the cave, and for the first time she thought she might survive. The desert had tried to claim her, but Koa had intervened. He had offered her more than just physical care, he had given her hope. And in that quiet, shadowed cave, surrounded by the harsh beauty of the Arizona wilderness, Clara understood that the line between stranger and savior could be drawn with acts of courage and compassion. Not blood or heritage. Educational note. This part illustrates traditional Apache healing knowledge, the importance of first aid and natural remedies in survival, and how respect across cultures can overcome fear and prejudice. The sun rose slowly over the jagged horizon, painting the desert in harsh gold and shadow. Clara Whitmore opened her eyes to the rough warmth of the cave's stone floor. Her muscles ached, but the deep searing pain in her side had eased, thanks to Koa's careful attention the night before. She sat up slowly, wincing as she tested the wound and found it wrapped securely, the herbs working their quiet magic. She realized that the desert, which had seemed merciless yesterday, was now a place where knowledge and skill meant survival, and Koa possessed both in abundance. "Time to move," Koa said softly, already gathering his belongings. Clara followed with hesitant steps, leaning heavily on him as they emerged from the shelter. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a sea of red sand, jagged rocks, and low brush. It was beautiful in a harsh, uncompromising way, yet deadly for anyone unprepared. Koa moved with a purpose, his step sure and confident. While Clara struggled to match his pace, every step a lesson in patience and resilience. "You need to conserve your water," he instructed, pausing to offer her small sips from the skin. "Sip slowly. Every drop counts. Gulping will make you weaker, faster." Clara nodded, grateful for his guidance. She realized that survival was not just about avoiding danger, it was about learning the rhythm of the land, understanding the desert's hidden rules. Koa began teaching her small lessons along the way: how to read the wind to find shelter from sudden storms, how to spot water hidden beneath the sand, how the patterns of birds could signal nearby predators or human activity. Every step was a practical lesson in endurance and observation, a survival curriculum she had never imagined she would need. Hours passed. The desert sun climbed higher, relentless and unforgiving, yet Clara found herself slowly adjusting. Her body ached, yes, but her mind sharpened. Each instruction from Koa became more than just advice, it was empowerment. She realized that the desert did not merely punish. It demanded respect, patience, and careful attention. And under Koa's guidance, she began to feel capable, even strong. As they walked, Clara found moments to observe Koa. He was quiet, moving with deliberate precision, yet his eyes were always alert. Every shadow, every sound, every flicker of movement was catalogued in his mind. She realized he had likely survived in these lands his entire life, and yet he showed no arrogance, only calm certainty and focus. His strength was not only in his skill but in his patience, his steady presence, his unwavering dedication to helping someone in need. By late afternoon, they stopped in a small natural canyon where a stream trickled in the shade. Koa instructed Clara to rest while he inspected the surroundings. He gathered herbs for her wound, picked small stones to build a fire pit, and filtered water through sand to ensure it was safe. Clara watched him and felt a mix of awe and gratitude. She had expected strangers in the desert to be self-serving, perhaps even dangerous. Yet Koa's every action reinforced a truth she had never truly believed: courage and compassion could exist together. even in a harsh world. Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly as he returned with water. "Because leaving you would be wrong," he replied, his voice steady, unwavering. "The desert does not forgive mistakes." "Neither do I." His words were simple, but they carried weight, as if the land itself had given him permission to intervene in her life. Clara felt a warmth spread in her chest, a sense of trust she hadn't known she could feel for someone she had just met. Night fell again, but this time it was different. They camped in the canyon, surrounded by rocks that shielded them from wind and prying eyes. The stars blazed overhead, unfamiliar constellations stretched across the desert sky, and Clara listened as Koa hummed a soft tune, the sound blending with the whisper of the stream. The desert was no longer an enemy, it was a teacher, and Koa was her guide. She realized she was learning more than survival. She was learning resilience, courage, and trust. By the time she closed her eyes, Clara knew that this journey through the harsh land would change her forever. She was no longer the frightened, helpless woman left bleeding in the sand. She was becoming someone who could endure, who could trust wisely, and who could survive with the guidance of someone who had chosen to stay when most would have passed her by. Educational theme. This part highlights the practical survival skills required in desert environments, including water conservation, reading natural signs, and using natural remedies. It also demonstrates the importance of mentorship and how knowledge passed across cultures can be life-saving. The desert was quiet that morning, deceptively so. Clara Whitmore had grown accustomed to the shifting patterns of wind and sun, the subtle signs of life that Koa had taught her to notice. Yet even she felt a chill as the distant hills seemed unusually still. The horses grazed lightly on sparse desert grass, and Koa's dark eyes scanned the horizon with a sharpness that made her stomach tighten. Something was coming, she could feel it. Though she did not yet know what, Koa moved with the same deliberate precision he had shown since finding her. "Stay close," he whispered, his hand lightly brushing hers. Clara obeyed instinctively, understanding that in this land every precaution mattered. She had learned from him how to read the desert, the way the wind shifted, the way the sun reflected off distant rock faces, even the way small animals froze when danger approached. The first sign of trouble was subtle. A glint of sunlight on metal far off in the canyon, a rifle barrel catching the light. Then a shadow moving fast across the rocks. Clara froze, her pulse quickening. The same outlaws who had attacked the stagecoach, they had found her again. "They're tracking us," Koa said quietly, already calculating the terrain and distance. He moved with an ease that was almost inhuman, yet every motion was deliberate, every step a lesson in desert warfare. "Follow me. Watch the shadows. Do not make a sound." Clara's heart pounded as they ducked behind a low rise, crouching low among rocks. Koa pointed out a narrow ravine ahead, barely noticeable unless one knew the land. "We can use that," he said. "They won't see it until it's too late." The outlaws shouted from a distance, their voices rough and crude, filled with anger and frustration. Clara realized they were armed with rifles and pistols, their intent unmistakable. They wanted no witnesses. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her shaking hands, and felt Koa's calm presence beside her. "Remember what I taught you," he whispered. "Use the terrain. The desert can fight for you if you know how to work with it." He led her into the ravine, moving silently along its shallow floor. Rocks overhead provided cover, and small boulders along the edge offered opportunities to block their pursuers. Koa showed Clara how to move her body low, how to keep her eyes on the horizon for movement without revealing her position. Each step was a lesson in patience, calculation, and courage, the skills that kept life clinging in the unforgiving desert. The outlaws followed, but Koa's strategy worked. By the time they realized the path was a trap, He had already positioned heavy rocks to block their escape and used the canyon's curves to confuse their aim. Clara watched, amazed as he moved like a shadow, silent, precise, untouchable. He even used small clouds of dust kicked up by their movement to obscure their position, teaching Clara how the desert itself could be an ally. When the confrontation ended, the outlaws were trapped, tied to small trees and rocks, left for a passing cavalry patrol to find. Clara exhaled in relief, her knees weak from tension. She turned to Koa, gratitude and awe mingling in her gaze. He looked at her calmly, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. "You did it," she whispered. "No," he said, shaking his head slightly. "We did it. Together. You followed, you learned, you survived. That matters as much as anything else." For the first time, Clara truly understood that survival was not only about strength or courage, but also about knowledge, observation, and trust. Koa had given her the skills to navigate not just this immediate danger, but the larger, unforgiving world of the desert. He had shown her how to respect the land, read its signs, and use it wisely. As the sun climbed higher, they moved onward toward the nearest settlement. Clara's body still ached, but her mind felt sharper than ever. She realized that the desert, which had once seemed like an enemy, had become a teacher, and that Koa, the Apache scout who had refused to leave her behind, had become more than a savior. He was her guide, mentor, and protector. Educational theme. This part highlights the tactical use of terrain and survival, the importance of observation and strategy in dangerous situations, and how knowledge of natural environments can protect life. It also demonstrates teamwork and trust in life-or-death circumstances. The settlement appeared on the horizon like an oasis, small and dusty, framed by the heat waves rising from the desert floor. Clara Whitmore's legs trembled as she stepped into the familiar patterns of civilization. The clatter of wagon wheels, the wooden planks of storefronts, and the smell of fresh bread mingling with horse sweat. For the first time since the attack on the stagecoach, she was almost certain that she would survive, yet fear lingered, subtle but persistent. She knew the outlaws had been driven off, yet townsfolk could be just as dangerous in their own way. Koa walked beside her, silent and composed. His presence was commanding, yet unassuming, a paradox that made him stand out even more among the rough-hewn people of the frontier town. He had carried her across the desert, protected her from men with guns, and taught her the ways of survival in an unforgiving land. Yet he would still be seen as other here. Clara felt her stomach tighten at the thought. As they reached the main street, curious eyes turned toward them. Some townsfolk whispered behind calloused hands, glances sharp with suspicion. Others stared openly, their faces marked by fear or disapproval. Koa's dark features, braided hair, and traditional clothing set him apart immediately. Clara recognized the look she had been warned about, the prejudice that simmered just beneath the surface in a place where settlers feared the unknown. One man stepped forward, tipping his hat but failing to hide the judgment in his eyes. "Who's this?" he asked, voice rough and questioning. "And what's she doing with you, stranger?" Clara's heart skipped. She could feel Koa's calm beside her, a steady presence that gave her courage. She straightened, taking a deep breath. "This man saved my life," she said clearly, her voice carrying over the whispers of the crowd. "And if he hadn't, I'd be lying dead in the desert right now. He protected me when no one else would." The crowd paused. Some murmured, confused. Others scowled. Koa said nothing, his eyes steady, silent, but Clara could feel the unspoken understanding between them. His actions spoke louder than any words. "Saved you?" a skeptical woman said, stepping forward. "From what?" "From men who wanted to kill me," Clara replied, meeting the woman's gaze. "From the desert, which would have claimed me if he had not been here. And from danger that none of you would have noticed in time." He has knowledge and skill that kept me alive." Slowly, tension began to shift. Some of the men and women lowered their voices, murmuring among themselves. Koa's calm authority, combined with Clara's testimony, started to break through the wall of suspicion. There were still wary faces, but fear was beginning to yield to curiosity. A young boy stepped forward, tugging at his mother's skirt. "Did he really fight the bad men?" he asked. His eyes were wide, full of admiration. Clara smiled faintly and nodded. "Yes, and he saved me," she said. The boy's mother looked embarrassed, realizing the danger she had nearly ignored. While the boy's excitement offered a glimmer of hope, a recognition that courage and skill could be respected, no matter the source. Over the next few hours, Clara spoke openly about what had happened. She told the townspeople about the ambush, about her injuries, and about Koa's unwavering dedication to keeping her alive. She explained how he had taught her to read the desert, to understand its hidden signs, and to survive in a place that could so easily kill the unprepared. Her words carried more weight than she realized. They were not only a defense of Koa, but a lesson in the value of knowledge, trust, and respect across cultural boundaries. By the day's end, the town had begun to shift. People who had once looked at Koa with suspicion now nodded in recognition of his bravery. Apologies were offered by a few of the older men, grudgingly at first, then with more sincerity as Clara continued to speak. Slowly, the town's walls of fear and prejudice cracked, just enough to allow understanding to seep in. Clara looked at Koa as they walked through the town. He remained silent, his expression calm, yet she could see in his eyes that he understood the small victory. Not only had he saved a life, but he had begun to change minds, bridging a gap that had existed for generations. Educational theme. This part highlights the social and cultural challenges in frontier towns, including prejudice toward Native Americans and how courage, truth, and testimony can foster understanding and respect. It shows that survival in the West was not only physical but also social, requiring integrity, advocacy, and bravery of a different kind. The sun sank low over the jagged horizon, spilling molten gold across the desert floor. Clara Whitmore stood on a small rise just outside the town, the wind tugging gently at her hair, carrying the scents of sagebrush and dust. For weeks, the desert had been her enemy, a relentless landscape of sun, sand, and danger. But now it felt different. It had become a teacher, shaping her into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient than she had ever imagined. And at her side stood Koa, the Apache scout who had refused to leave her behind, whose steady hands had guided her through every trial. Clara looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and admiration swirling in her chest. "I owe you everything," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the whispering wind. Koa shook his head, a small, almost shy smile touching his lips. "You owe me nothing," he replied. "You found your strength again. You survived because you learned, because you listened, and because you refused to give up." Her heart swelled. He was right, she had survived, but she had not done it alone. And somehow, in the harshest place she had ever known, she had discovered more than survival. She had discovered trust, courage, and the quiet possibility of love. For a long moment, they simply stood there, watching the desert stretch endlessly before them. The orange sky deepened into shades of crimson and purple, and the first stars began to shimmer like distant fires. Clara realized that the desert, once a symbol of isolation and danger, had become a bridge to a new life, a life she could share with Koa. "I don't want you to leave," she whispered, stepping closer. Her hand brushed against his, tentative but full of meaning. He looked down at her, his dark eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "I never planned to," he said softly. "The desert is harsh, yes, but it is also home. And now it can be our home together if you want it to be." Clara's chest tightened with a joy she had almost forgotten existed. The desert had taken much from her innocence, her safety, her peace of mind, but it had given back something richer: resilience, wisdom, and the promise of companionship. She smiled, allowing herself to fully trust in the man who had guided her through every danger. Over the following weeks, Clara and Koa worked to build a life together. They established a small trading post near the edge of the desert, a place where travelers and settlers could find supplies, guidance, and safety. Clara taught townsfolk what she had learned from Koa: how to respect the land, conserve water, and read signs of weather or danger. Koa, in turn, shared his knowledge of the desert, of plants, herbs, and survival skills that had been passed down through generations of Apache wisdom. Their partnership became more than survival. It became education. The town slowly changed its perspective, learning from Clara's testimony and Koa's example. Children were fascinated by his stories and lessons, and adults began to appreciate the skills that had kept both Koa and Clara alive in the unforgiving desert. Through their efforts, the frontier community grew stronger and more connected, bridging cultural divides in ways that had once seemed impossible. Evenings were spent beneath the stars, the desert wind rustling through the sparse trees. Clara and Koa would talk quietly, sharing hopes, dreams, and memories of the days when survival had been uncertain. There was laughter now, and a sense of peace, a rhythm to life that neither had thought possible after the terror of the stagecoach attack. Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had started as a frightened, injured woman, alone in a wasteland that seemed determined to claim her life. She had encountered danger, prejudice, and the raw power of nature. But she had also encountered courage, compassion, and a strength within herself that she had never known. Koa had been her guide, protector, and companion, but she had discovered her own resilience along the way. The desert remained a teacher, its lessons etched into their daily lives. It reminded them of patience, respect, and the value of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. And in its harsh beauty, it had given them a chance at love, partnership, and a future together. Clara reached for Koa's hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Then let's make it ours," she said, her voice steady with conviction. Koa squeezed her hand, smiling warmly. "Together," he agreed. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a final golden glow across the land. The desert had tested them, threatened them, and reshaped them, but it had also given them a life richer than either could have imagined. And as the stars lit the night sky, Clara and Koa faced the future with courage, trust, and love, knowing that the harshest trials had forged the strongest bonds. Happy ending. Clara and Koa survived the desert, bridged cultural divides, educated their community, and built a life together rooted in trust, knowledge, and love. The wilderness that once threatened their survival had become their home, their classroom, and their foundation for a new beginning. Educational theme. The story emphasizes survival skills, desert ecology, cross-cultural understanding, mento,